Welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds, a podcast where I give my commentary on different topics in today's society. So today we have a bit of a central theme in some of the stories going on, and that is blackness and identity. I wanted to start first with police brutality. So, this isn't really me breaking down the history and the systems of power and how everything works. That's been done over many different platforms, and I suggest anybody that really wants to know more into the details, you definitely seek those out. This is really me just talking from my perspective as an African-American man, and kind of what I go through. And obviously, like anything else, there's people that share those experiences, and there's people that might not. It's not a thing that we can say every single person acts this exact way with anything. But it's a good place to start because it's not about any particular case or movement, really. It's just kind of, we know it's very prominent. And if people still deny it and choose to deny it, then, you're not just looking at the facts. We've it's not just one case. It's not just a rumor, a he said, she said. It's video, it's audio. We've seen what it looks like. And if you really pay attention to stories, this ain't new. This is stuff that's happened for a long, long time. And so anyway, my thing with it is that it creates, it kind of creates this reality. Perception, as they say, is oftentimes reality. And so it kind of creates this reality once you continue to see things over and over again when you're exposed to it. And for some people in their mental health, they don't want to they have to stop being exposed to it, or they willingly ignore it. Sometimes for mental health, sometimes just because they want to be blissfully ignorant. And either way, it's because there's a real effect. People don't ignore it just to say they did it. They ignore it because they know it's a real effect on you when you're exposed to certain things every day. The way you look at the world is a result of how you've been exposed to different things and the ways you've been exposed and what you've been exposed to. And so to continue seeing these things, it creates this kind of paranoia, this kind of reality where you feel like you are a target. But then on top of that, there's definitely a lot of people that have had, instances that kind of confirm those fears. And it might have gone the other way. There's people that didn't really feel like they're different, and then they had a bad experience. Now they're starting to pay attention more to the things that are going on. And so whatever way it works for you, it kind of creates this reality where you feel like you're a target. Now, for me, I've never had any real bad experiences. I've had definitely some profiling, actually. And for me, I should say it's just all my perspective. What I feel like wasn't a bad experience probably would have been traumatizing to somebody, who knows. But for me, I've never had that crazy experience. And one thing that I think about shaped me was that one of my family members was a member of Chicago Police Department when I was young. She left the force, but she was, in my early age, I saw my auntie as a cop. And so that, I think, definitely plays into my narrative and the way I looked at cops. But I would say for a long time, I never really looked at it that way. And again, I think there's some people who go through life that way, where you're like, I don't really see it as like some type of issue with race. And that's great until you actually run up into an experience that really changes that belief. So for me, I've never been like particularly a fan of cops. Like, I've seen my auntie as a cop, but it was just like, okay, I never was like a big fan, never was against. It was just like, follow the rules. And I'd follow the rules at home. So I just, always about following rules at school as well. So I never thought much of it. But then I would say, funny enough, obviously, when you start driving, then you get different interactions. Like, it's one thing, and obviously you can have bad interactions not driving, but it's one thing to be in the house all day, or to take a, stroll down the block to the store or something. Your exposure is different. But when you're driving, then your exposure to law enforcement in general is a lot different. And so if you're speeding, which most people speed at, legally by going over the speed limit, and most of us are speeding, or if you're doing whatever you're doing, you're like, everybody's looking for cops for some point or another. And so I think that to me is when I got more aware. Now, I won't go deep into this story, but I've had my experience with the justice system. And that is when I completely switched around my entire outlook on police and everything. It was my exposure to the system behind police that really made me change how I looked at everything. And even that experience, the arresting officer told me, because he was a newer officer, and in short words, he told me, like, the person that was training him made him pull me over and said that it would be a good test for him or something like that. And so, I won't go deep into that story. It all kind of worked out in the end, but that's what got me caught up first. Literally, the officer told me, and they're both European American. They told me, like, he profiled me and said, let's go after him. I wasn't doing anything. And so there's that. And so that had my eyes, now you start to see more. But it isn't so much that. I think the thing that I would get across for anybody that doesn't understand the relationship with the police is that there is a paranoia and a fear. Again, we know that there's different phobias. What might seem irrational to you could be debilitating or completely anxiety inducing or whatever for somebody else. So you might not feel it, but that doesn't mean it's not real for somebody else. So if you don't identify with it, that's the best way I could tell you, is that it is a fear. It is a true fear. And so it's scary because for me, again, I was at a point where I was like, man, because this was not early, but this was probably 2014, 2013, where I had my big experience. And even at that point, I was just like, man, I really am going to be targeted. Like, I could get in trouble more than other people. It was just trouble. And I thought about, there's times, I was outside my own house and I've been pulled over not pulled over, but like cops pulled up multiple times. What are you doing here? Do you live here? Da, da, da. Like, I've been through it, and I've been through all the classics. Like, if you're chilling with, especially if you're with a woman, and a woman of a different background than African American, and it's not just European, it's anything, at least for me. If it's not also African American, then they ask questions. Where they're the driver, I'm sitting on the other side, and it's like, let me see your ID. Like, you're not even, like, all that stuff you see in movies, I've been through that. And to me, it didn't really click until after I went through the whole system. Now I'm just like, oh, I'm always going to get in trouble more. They're going to be looking for me. If they don't know me, or if something's going on, I'm going to be more targeted to be in trouble. That's the extent of what I thought. Then what happened later in 2014, or maybe I think it might have been in 2015 by that point. But obviously Ferguson happened, and you had the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And obviously it wasn't just because of the incident and the way it happened. It was because technology started getting to a point where we could start exposing things. And as technology got to that point, we start seeing more and more and more. And so what happened was, now I'm not driving around thinking that, oh, if I get pulled, or if I'm driving, I'm more likely to get pulled over. I'm more likely to get a ticket. I'm more likely to get arrested over a traffic violation or whatever. Now I'm thinking that any interaction I have with a cop, I could get killed. And there is no rationalizing it. I mean, I honestly 100% fully believe that there is a defense mechanism. There's a fear factor that goes into it as well. But even with that, there's no rationalizing that some of that plays from racism and discrimination and prejudice. And so now I'm thinking that it doesn't matter. And that's what we ultimately have learned in the last 6 years. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if because it used to be so many things like, don't have the music up. Don't talk this way to them. I like literally people like, don't drive a Buick. Don't do this type of thing. Like, I've heard all types of stuff, and growing up, you believe it. But then what you start to see is it does not matter. You could do everything right. You could be 100% in the right, and you can get killed. And that took a toll on me. So from that point, it was no longer, oh, I see a cop behind me, like, oh man, I might get a ticket. No, it's like I might lose my life. So here's a great example. Not great, but all of this rolled into one. One time, actually my parents live in a place that's right near the border of Indiana. And so it's Northwest Indiana, which obviously is near Chicago. But they live like 2 minutes. So we've always gone to Indiana for almost everything. And one of the things that I go to Indiana for is to the movie theaters. Obviously, I watch a lot of movies. And so one time I'm going to the movie theater, and you could go through the main street, but there's a quicker way where you can cut through this little, I don't know what you call it, because it's not a gated community, but it's, it's a little area of houses and stuff right by the store, behind the store. And so it's a nice community. Everybody's got nice cars, fountains, people walk around, walk their dog, nice little suburban Indiana community, whatever. And I've never had an issue there. Like, I've never, ever once had a problem over there. And so I remember this was so funny. So a bunch of things happened. I stopped at this stop sign. I turned left and I go down the street towards the movie theater. Actually, I wasn't going to the movies. I was going to Home Depot. But anyway, the Home Depot is across the street from the movie theater. But same way. So I'm going down the street and then this cop pulls me over. Now, keep in mind, I already saw this cop. This cop was on the street that I was turning onto. He was down the street. I noticed his squad car was parked on the street. It was further down the street though. And he was nowhere near me at the stop sign. So I turned down that street, and as soon as I passed him, he kind of turns down a different street and basically goes around in a circle to then pull up behind me. I don't know why, but he does that. And so he pulls me over, and I saw him leave as soon as I passed him. So I'm already preparing like this is going to be an issue. Here's the problem. At the time, I had my first car, which was older, of course. And so it always had issues. This moment in time, the driver's side window didn't work. It wouldn't go, like the motor was busted. And so the only way, I could talk to people or whatever, or if I'm ordering food or whatever, I have to open the door. Things happen to cars. You don't always have money to fix it at that moment. So he pulls me over and I'm already like, oh my God. Now I'm in Indiana. It's not CPD, which is a little different. And I'm, it's broad daylight. There's people around. Doesn't always matter, but I'm not as shaky. But then when I realized that I can't roll my window down, I'm like, oh crap, this could be bad. And so when he comes up to ask me, roll your window down so he could talk to me, I realized there's no way for me to tell him that my door doesn't open or that my window doesn't work. There's no way for me to tell him I need to open the door so we can communicate. And so I'm like, either I'm going to come off like I'm trying to make a move, or I'm going to come off like I'm just not listening to him. So what I decided to do, because I knew, honestly, this was a bad, and in this moment, literally thought I didn't know if I thought I would die, but I might get shot or beat or something might happen right now. So what I decided to do was to open it before he got to the door. Because if he got to the door and he's talking to me and I try to open it, it seems like it'll be, to me at least, it seemed like it'd be worse. So I just tried to open the door before he got there so he could hear me as he approached, tell him the window wasn't working. And so I cracked the door. I didn't swing it open. I cracked the door open, and obviously as he reacted, he slams the door back and puts his hand on his gun. He didn't pull his gun out, but he puts his hand on his gun, and then with the other hand he slams the door closed. And I'm trying to yell, I can't, the window doesn't work. And so he didn't get too crazy aggressive, but obviously he was, all this stuff. And so obviously once he figured it out, I was able to open the door a little bit. And he was asking me those weird questions, because I drove a Buick, funny enough. But he was asking me what are you doing around here? Where you going? Stuff that has nothing to do. I wasn't even doing anything. And so when he was I can't hear you as well, he opened the door fully. And that's when he saw, because I had just come from work, he saw that I was in a full suit. And I saw him look me up and down. He saw that I was in, shirt and tie, full suit. And he literally stopped asking questions and just was like, you didn't come to a full stop at the stop sign. Make sure you stop fully next time. I'm gonna have to write you a citation. Wrote me a citation, gave it to me, told me to go on. And so a lot of things in that moment, but I think that illustrates kind of how it goes, because you would hope that in that situation, look, my window doesn't work. It is what it is. Especially at that time, I'm not rich, and I'm not rich now, but things happen. My car's broke. It is what it is. I shouldn't have to worry about that, but I do. And that's privilege in itself. People use privilege so much like it's a negative thing, but it's just a luxury to know, even before I felt this way about cops. It was a luxury for me to, think oh man, if this happens, we can talk about it respectfully, blah, blah, blah. The way I feel about cops now is the way people feel about, strangers at a bar, or, if you're walking down a dark alley, or if you accidentally spill something on somebody at the club, or whatever it is, I don't know how this situation is going to go. I hope they're rational. I hope they're adults and mature about it, but I don't know which way this is going to go. I shouldn't feel that way with a cop. I shouldn't call a firefighter and think man, are they going to help me, or are they going to argue with me? I shouldn't call a cop and feel am I going to want to be the one that gets arrested, even though I'm the victim? And I definitely shouldn't have to feel if I talk to this cop, am I going to get shot? And that's unfortunately the way it feels. For right or wrong, there's a lot of evidence that tells you for right, but for right or wrong, that's how I feel. And so that's the luxury of not having to feel that way. And so that was Indiana. Let me tell you, my interactions with Chicago Police Department is very different. And so with them, I literally, like, my stomach drops when I see a cop. Drops when I see lights. Like, I mean, it's hard to explain. I don't know if I've ever had a panic attack or an anxiety attack, but I have to imagine that's what it feels like. Like, the chest gets tight, stomach drops, and you just automatically nervous. Every time I see it, I'm not doing nothing wrong. And even, it doesn't matter where I'm coming from and where I'm going, but even those things, I think about it like, I'm just coming from work. I'm just going home. I just got some groceries. I'm just picking up dinner. I'm not doing anything to anybody. And no, it does not matter. Because now I know it doesn't matter. Now I know the stories don't matter. Your background don't matter. They will get you, innocent or not. And that whole psyche of, you know, seeing it over and over, experiencing it different times, and hearing other people's stories, that all culminates into this fear. And some people might still say it's irrational, but I don't think it is. But even if you think it is, it's real to certain people. And that's the relationships we have with cops, man. Not everybody, but if we're talking about in a general historical Afro-American, you know, that's the relationship a lot of times, especially in, you know, big cities. And so it's sad, but that's the perspective I come from it with. And it doesn't matter. Like, I'm in a small college town now because I went back to school. But for a while, I was the same clenched fist, same thing. And really, it's no different. Like, they bored out here, too. So it took a while to kind of get a little more loose. But I'm just like, yeah, nah, man. Because and what makes it worse, honestly, for me, is that I know cops. I know people now that I grew up with, or people that I've made friends with that wear the badge, and they tell you it's true. They absolutely let you know it's true. And not just the standpoint of people are hunting people. I don't think it's like those days. But what I do think is there's a privilege that comes with hiding behind the badge sometimes. There's a power that certain people feel. And there's a profile of the type of people that gravitate to those jobs. And if you mix that with any type of prejudice that might be known or unknown, you could have bad results. And so you just have to think about it. It's reality. It's not the reality for every single police officer, but it's the reality for some. And you can't take the gamble that you're dealing with somebody that's cool. You got to be on your edge and, you know, on your toes in case it's somebody that's not cool. So there's that. Now, linking that over to Karens, good old Karens. So if you haven't heard, actually, let me talk about Karens a little bit, then we'll go into the Central Park. So I don't get the Karen stuff. Like, maybe you heard me talk a little bit about looking at cops from the other side and putting yourself in their shoes. But when it comes to these situations of people that just think they can call the cops on people to just do their bidding for them, I don't get it. It's not being socialized to a irrational fear or prejudice. It's not, you know, any type of misunderstanding of cultures. It really is just privilege. It's just straight privilege to think that I can hurt you this way because of who I am and who you are. And I'm going to use that against you or whoever is not doing what I want. Because it ain't a matter of life and death. It's rarely a matter of life and death. Rarely a matter of even threatening somebody. All these cases we see are just people being inconvenienced or people just going in other people's business. And so, to me, that one's just hard because maybe I just don't come from that place where I feel like I can leverage people like that and never felt that I would want to. I feel like I've been on the opposite side of that. And so I can't tell you what the rationale is there besides just being purely privileged and knowing you can do it. So with the Central Park thing, what I want to say about that, obviously, is not cool. I mean, we've seen so many of these. It's not cool on any level, and especially hers. Like, you see people like, oh, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Or the lady with the UPS driver. I don't know if y'all saw that, but you look suspicious, and we've had robberies around here. What are you doing in this neighborhood? Like, that's one thing. This lady goes off because the man asks her to put a leash on her dog, which is the actual law. So you're not only is this person not doing anything wrong, you're doing something wrong actively. On top of that, you got the whole threatening, calling the cops. But then she's also choking this dog out. And I'm not a big animal lover. I'm not up in arms, but it's just ironic. And so this lady tells you what she's going to do. I'm going to call them, tell them African-American man is threatening my life. Okay, do it. She calls, and all of a sudden, white woman tears. And so here's the funny part. Obviously, we're at a place of intersection where you got not only ethnic background, but you also got gender coming into play. And so you can look at it from a couple different ways. I choose to approach this from the lens of gender, of man and woman, because that to me is what it feels most familiar like, in my own opinion, of what I've experienced. So yes, there's absolutely the component of, one being African American, one being Euro. Got that. But for me, again, I approach it from the lens of, that you're going to be believed. It's not just, hey, there's a black person here, come get them. But you also know that being a woman, if you cry and sound distressed, that you can convince people of things more readily than other people. And again, I'm not trying to battle about which one is worse. It's an intersection. They all play together. But to me, that's the way I look at it, is that, oh, I'm a woman, I'm in trouble. And that not only will you get a response of some sort, but you'll also more than likely heighten the level of sensitivity and priority. And it's no different than a lot of people when they talk about false accusers with rape, or people that use the Me Too movement and lie about it. It's not just that you are messed up for trying to screw somebody, but on top of that, you're making it harder for people that are actually in trouble. You're making it harder because people already are like, there's this white woman tears, there's this crying wolf, and you're just adding to that stigma. And it's bad all around. Now, with that even being said, I still have to say, I never understood the people that go on about, I hope her life gets ruined. I hope she gets fired. I hope they take her dog away. I hope she does this and does that. And to me, look, I'm not strong either way. I don't get the extreme on either side. Like, what I was saying was, when I was talking to people, is that if her job decided to fire her, okay, whether it be the pressure to fire her, whether they actually didn't like her, whether it was actually against their morals, they didn't want somebody like that, whatever it is, that's their business. If they decide to fire her, I'm not going to protest and ask for them to give her job back. But if they didn't fire her, I wasn't going to protest for her to lose her job either. And so then obviously people like to be 0, 100, black and white extreme. So it's like, oh, you're condoning it. No, No, things aren't mutually exclusive. You can do two things at once. You can have compassion and you can also not condone someone's actions. Like, to me, two wrongs don't make a right. You know, the eye for eye thing, that's not my philosophy. I believe we can't have compassion. I mean, people have to realize that the world you grow up in America is very much punitive. Whether you believe it or not, whether you practice it or not, if you grew up in America, that's what's around you. That's what you're taught through media, through society. You do something wrong, you get punished. That's very much how we are. But people also got to understand that's not the only way to run society or live life. Where not every single country lives that way. So while it might be our dominant thing to do, you do the crime, you do the time, all that stuff, that doesn't mean that's the only way to do things. So some people believe in more restorative practices and blah, blah, blah. Me personally, all I know is that the whole slap on the, or not slap on the wrist, but the eye for the eye thing don't always work. Obviously the system's broken, but the whole thing doesn't work. I mean, you've seen multiple stories of people that were released from prison temporarily because of Corona. First thing they did was kill people. Went right back to jail. So obviously the correction process doesn't work for everybody. So even if you think it works the best, you can't say it works for everybody. So is it in me to be like, ruin her life? She could have ruined his life. I know. Trust me. I know she could have ruined his life. She could have had his life taken. It could have got bad. But then does that mean go back and do the same thing to her? I don't know if I agree with that. Like, I mean, I've said this about many things, whether it was for men or women or whoever, white, black, brown, whatever. I don't know that the whole quote unquote cancel culture, I don't know that it makes sense. I feel like it's toxic. It's not really fixing anything. You're focusing more on the person and not the problem. Like that is putting the onus just on the person. You did this because you're a bad person. And that's not true. That's rarely ever true. People are socialized through the world to think, learn, and feel certain ways about things. And so there's a bigger problem at hand than her. But the quick solution is to punish her. Oh, you're bad, punish her. And then some will say it sets a precedent so other people don't do it. Obviously, that's not true. I mean, it might work for some, but by and large, that's not true. People still do the same things other people get in trouble for. And so, to me, there's a bigger lesson and picture there than just trying to punish her. And then, funny enough, after having that conversation, the man who was the victim of this whole thing came out himself in the interview and said that he feels uncomfortable that she lost her job and that she's a figure of hate. And he went on to talk about how he doesn't necessarily feel like that's the right response. We all make mistakes. And so, funny enough, and I've been in this situation too, now the people who are on his side are against him. And he's the victim. I literally been through this before, where people want to be outraged for you. And if you don't share that outrage, then they're going to now they have permission to lash against you. Because everybody's talking about a moral high ground. Who has the moral high ground? Who is more moral and virtuous than the other person? That's the person that gets to speak. So even though you're the victim of it, you're not outraging, you're not upset, your morals aren't as high as mine, so now I'm gonna get mad at you too. And that's not everybody, but there's people that's lashing out against him. And it's like, how can you tell somebody who went through it how to feel about it? And so I just thought it was really interesting to see him come out and make those statements. And yes, obviously it's a problem and all that. But again, I think that's that short-term solution. I don't know that that's necessarily the answer obviously there should be repercussions, but to like the mentality for people to automatically be like, I want to ruin her life. I want to ruin her life. Like, to me, I don't think that's helping anything. I don't think that's productive, me personally. All right. Now, yeah, so to wrap all that up, to say about the, I guess, disadvantage, I don't know the opposite of privilege, but the disadvantage, the deficit, the context of me and my feelings about cops translate into the very opposite of this lady's feelings of privilege when it comes to cops, and that they not only are going to be helpful, but they're going to do what it is she needs done because of who she is and because of her experience with cops. It's just the opposite side of the coin. And so all that leads into this last piece about Joe Biden. Now, if people aren't already upset, people are always upset, but if people aren't already, they'll be upset now. So Joe Biden, if you didn't know, was interviewed on the Breakfast Club with Charlamagne the God, and basically at the end of the interview, Charlamagne was saying something along the lines of, what do you have to say to those people who, you know, still aren't convinced or still figuring out if they want to vote for you? And Biden said, if you still having trouble figuring out if you're going to vote for me, you ain't black. Basically, if you ain't voting for me, you ain't black. And naturally, people went up in arms. Now, was what he said inappropriate? Yes, absolutely. But what I will say, similar to the last thing, is that we're trying to focus the punishment on the person and not what the actual concept that's being at play. Because the fact is, he was not saying anything that other people aren't saying. And so, again, we can focus on, well, he's the presidential candidate and he should know this and he should conduct himself that. And I agree with all that, but that loses the bigger conversation of why people say that. Why would he even think that? If he was just being honest, why would he think that? Because a lot of people have told him that. Because a lot of people have said that. A lot of people in the African American community, and then the larger black community as well, but mainly in the African American community, there's a long history of you ain't black if you vote Republican. Point blank, period. Now, we know we got Trump, and I don't even have to get into that. That's a whole nother level of hate with people. It's just like, to the point, don't talk to me if you voted for Trump and all that stuff. That's everywhere. So we already know there's people out there that's just going to shut you down if you vote for Trump, period. But there's a long history of the party lines and Democrats being a quote unquote black party. Now, I think, well, no, I don't know the numbers. I wouldn't say, but I venture to guess one of the bigger trends is people don't vote, but there's that. Anyway, the point is, that's always been around. That has always been around. And while it highlights Biden's misjudgment, I hope it highlights the idea and the fact that we need to stop with this. We need to stop with this idea of telling people what's black, because 100% there's nobody that gets to tell you what your black identity is. Nobody. Because the fact is, it doesn't come off. And that's what people that have not chosen to educate themselves don't understand. It doesn't matter what you listen to, who you vote for, what you eat, you know, how you talk, how you dress. That black don't come off. And that's the lesson I had, you know, kind of connecting to earlier. That's one of the lessons I had to learn. And one of the lessons that I think people learn who don't have negative experiences with cops and stuff. Eventually, you have to learn that black don't come off. It don't matter what you do. And so to have this idea that we should be voting for this party, or even in the people that are upset that, oh, well, this just shows that politicians don't care. they just take the vote for granted, blah, blah, blah. Every politician does that. There's so many people like, oh, this just highlights a long line of politicians who say things and then don't actually cash in. That's every single politician to many groups. It's not just the black vote. It's all types of people's votes that they pander to just to not screw them, but to ignore them later. Now, this does talk about specifically how the black vote or the minority voting a lot of times is reserved for Democratic parties, at least in their eyes. And so while some people, and I think it's different now, but some people pander a little more because they're starting to see the power of the black vote. There's still, at the end of the day, there's going to be the politicians that realize, like, look, I don't have to go as hard in this group of constituents because there is this built-in idea that the Democrats is for black people. And that is not just by politicians. That's by the people. That's by the people online calling you a coon or Uncle Tom. That's online by the people calling you a sellout if you don't do this or you don't do that. People perpetuate this idea. So to be stunned that Joe Biden said this, I'm not. You could be. That's fine. To think it's inappropriate, 100% agree with you. That's fine. You could carry yourself differently, although look at our president currently. But at the end of the day, the bigger picture here is this misguided notion that you vote Democrat if you black. And that is being perpetuated by a lot of people. So let's not just act like Biden said this and was the only person to ever say this in a vacuum. No, this comes in the context of a lot of other people putting that sentiment out there. And I hope it starts a bigger conversation about that. But it's a tough spot. I love it. Honestly, I love it. Like I'm 85% serious on here. But I like the joke. I love comedy. I'm a fan of stand-up comedy. So I like the jokes. My humor's a little dark. I like the fact that I laughed. I was like, Biden pretty much screwed Eric because it's like, oh, well, you can't vote for Trump because everyone's talking bad about Trump. But now it's like, well, Biden just said some real off the cuff stuff. Can we vote for him too? And it's funny. He said exactly what people think. Like, well, you got to vote for me because you ain't black if you don't. And it's just like, bro, wow. The stuff that's being said now is I don't know if you laugh or if you cry at it. But anyway, this idea of being black, what's black, is silly to me. And hopefully this conversation goes towards getting rid of it. All right, so that's it for me. No, I talked a lot, but go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about any of those topics. Share it around, get the conversation started, and thank you for listening.